He had worked his whole life for that land, saving, building, and protecting it as a legacy for his family. But one day, without warning, the powerful HOA moved in, building home after home, as if his rights, his history, and his voice meant nothing. To them, it was just property. To him, it was everything. Yet what they didn't know was that this man had a plan, one that would turn their greed into their greatest mistake. The question is, who really owned the future of that land? For generations, the land had been more than soil and grass. It was a story of survival, passed down from his grandfather, who once tilled its earth with his bare hands. The land stood as a rare victory in a world where black families were often pushed aside and denied ownership. The man had grown up walking its fields, planting trees that now stretched tall into the sky, and watching his children play where he once did. Every fence post he drove, every seed he planted, was a piece of his identity, proof that perseverance could overcome prejudice. By the time he was older, the land had become his greatest achievement, a quiet sanctuary where he could watch the sun rise and set, knowing that it belonged to him. It wasn't just property. It was memory, history, and legacy all tied together. Neighbors admired the care he gave it. They knew he wasn't rich by the world's standards, but on that land, he felt wealthy beyond measure. It was the kind of wealth you couldn't buy, only earn. But one day, whispers began. Meetings he wasn't invited to, papers he never signed. Surveyors appeared at the edge of his fields, measuring, marking, as though preparing for something he hadn't agreed to. He didn't yet realize it, but the life he had built, the land he cherished, was about to face a storm more ruthless than nature itself. At first, it was small things, subtle, almost easy to ignore. A letter slipped into his mailbox with rules he had never seen before. Restrictions about fences, about trees, about how land within the community should be maintained. He shook his head. His land wasn't part of their community, or so he thought. But then came the trucks. Big, loud, and unapologetic. They rolled in, carrying supplies as if the ground were already theirs. Surveyors hammered stakes into the soil, drawing invisible lines that cut through the fields his grandfather once plowed. When he asked what they were doing, their answers were clipped, dismissive, just following orders. Soon, concrete foundations appeared, then frames, then rooftops. Day by day, the open fields shrank, replaced by rows of identical houses. Strangers drove past him, waving politely as though he were just another passerby. But he wasn't a passerby. He was the owner, or at least he had been. The HOA claimed paperwork, documents, agreements he had supposedly signed. He knew he hadn't. Yet each time he pushed back, the response was the same. The houses were staying. The law was on their side. And behind their legal language lay something darker. The unspoken truth that they believed his voice, as a black man, carried little weight against their authority. Nights grew restless. He'd sit on his porch, staring at the silhouettes of new homes that rose like invaders on his soil. The laughter of families moving in echoed across land that once belonged only to his. Every sound was a reminder that piece by piece, his legacy was slipping away. But what the HOA didn't know was that while they were building walls, he was building a case. Quietly, carefully, he gathered every document, every record of ownership, every letter they had sent. What looked like defeat on the surface was, in truth, a trap being set, one that could topple the very empire they were so proudly constructing. And as the final houses neared completion, his moment was approaching too. The HOA board gathered proudly that evening, cutting the ribbon on what they called their crown jewel, a brand new neighborhood of 90 homes. Smiles, speeches, and handshakes filled the air, while the man who had once tilled that soil stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, watching. To them, he was invisible. To him, they were thieves celebrating their prize. But what they didn't realize was that every shovel of dirt, every brick laid, had been documented. The man had traced deeds back decades, proving that the land was his and his alone. Not only that, he had uncovered that their so-called transfer of ownership was riddled with errors, falsified signatures, and violations of state law. As the crowd applauded, a messenger stepped forward, delivering envelopes to the stunned board members. Inside each was a lawsuit, thick, detailed, undeniable. 90 homes, all sitting squarely on stolen property. The HOA had not just built a neighborhood, they had built a fortress of liability. The color drained from their faces. For the first time, the power shifted. The man was no longer the victim of their arrogance. He was the one holding their fate. Families cheered around them, unaware of the storm about to break. The very land they stood on was no longer theirs to celebrate. And as the cameras flashed and the speeches faltered, one truth became clear. The HOA had built its empire on sand, and the tide was coming in. The case moved quickly. What the HOA thought would be a simple defense collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. Every forged signature, every false claim, every illegal step was laid bare. Courtrooms that once dismissed his voice now echoed with his evidence. And the law, at last, spoke in his favor. The verdict was clear. The land was his. Those 90 homes, once symbols of greed and arrogance, now stood as monuments to the power of persistence and truth. The HOA faced fines, lawsuits, and humiliation. Some families lost what they thought they owned, not because of the man, but because of the reckless choices made by those who believed they could take what was never theirs. For him, it wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, about proving that his history, his family, and his rights could not be erased. Walking those fields again, he saw more than houses. He saw a story, his story, etched into the ground, a reminder that dignity can outlast injustice. But the lesson stretched far beyond one man's victory. It raised a question we cannot ignore. How many times has land, opportunity, or life itself been stolen simply because of the color of someone's skin? And how many more times will it happen before society truly listens? The HOA built homes, but in the end, they built something else too, a warning. A reminder that injustice, no matter how powerful it may seem, cannot stand forever against truth.